The Holocaust is the best example of who the Nazis really were. In many ways, the Nazis were nothing more than cold-blooded killers that had a desire to try to eliminate anyone and everyone that they believed to be inferior. The reason why they go after the Jews first is because they believe that they are the greatest threat to the purity of blood, as we've talked about before with the writings of Houston Chamberlain, Wilhelm Marr, and others. It is also important to realize that the Holocaust is not just a Nazi thing. As you'll find out, there are concentration camps all throughout Germany, all throughout Europe. And one thing that many of the Europeans and Germans had in common with the Nazis was this dislike or this hatred of the Jews. And the reason why is up until the year 1967, it was the official position of the European Catholic Church that the Jews were solely to blame for the death of Christ. Because of that, throughout history, as you're going to see, there were multiple attempts to try to either eliminate Jews, restrict where they live, or even deny their right to be classified as humans. The Holocaust is propaganda at its worst. If you look at the Eternal Jew exhibit that was in Berlin, you look at a lot of the writings that were in art that was done by Nazis, you see that they really try to villainize and dehumanize Jewish people. And it's really sad to say, but in a lot of ways, it worked. It accomplished their objective, as horrific and as disgusting as that might be. It did what they wanted to do. The U.S. Holocaust Museum for years had an exhibit called The Power of Deception. It was all about Nazi propaganda and the Holocaust. Some really powerful stuff. If you ever get a chance to go to the Holocaust Museum, I highly recommend it. There were 9.5 million Jews in Europe in 1933. In 1945, there were approximately 3 million. That means 6 million Jews, they're going to die. And of those 6 million, we know the names of less than half. The Nazis had wanted to turn the Jews into a historical myth. And when you consider that they eliminated 2/3 of the Jewish population, they came rather close. A brief history of the Jewish people. They are the most persecuted people throughout history. The Romans applied restrictions and attempted to exile them. They restricted where they could live, their rights, etc. You can see here a series of dates just to go over real quick. 135 AD, they left Israel. 312 AD during the Council of Nicaea. The church tried to eliminate all parts of Jewish scripture. In 420 AD, the Christian church is the prevailing religion in Rome. And it's also during this time that they start to use the text of Matthew to blame the Jews for the death of Jesus. It's kind of talked about just a moment ago. And that idea will prevail all the way through the Middle Ages and all the way until really the 1960s. Periodic persecution. The Jews had to be mobile. You can see in 1290 they were expelled from York, 1350 from France, 1492 from Spain. In 1123 and 1124 respectively, Jews were denied the right to be classified as human beings in the countries of Britain and France. 1770 they had to wear symbols such as the Star of David. They had to pay taxes as livestock. They had to get permission of lords before they could move, where they could live, and all these other things. If you really look at all this, really the Nazis and Hitler just did on a much grander scale what had already happened to the Jewish people throughout history. You know, the wearing of the Star of David was not a new idea. That really started happening somewhat during the Middle Ages. Jews during the plague were accused of poisoning whales, which, caused the plague to spread. All of these things were a major problem. And then on top of that, things are really starting to change in the 1770s. The world is starting to go more towards this thing called nationalism, where you no longer associate yourself with your religion first, but your country first. And I know it's kind of hard for us to understand, but once upon a time, people would refer to themselves as a Catholic first, a Protestant first, and British or French or German, etc. second. But all this really starts to change in the 1700s. The Jews are still referred to as the Jewish question or the Jewish problem during the Congress of Vienna in 1815. That ought to tell you why the final solution is referred to as the final solution. What is the answer to a problem? What is the answer to a question? It's a solution. In this case, a final solution. From 1890s to 1914, Vienna was the kind of the culture center of Europe, as influenced greatly by Jews. Mayor Karl Lueger was there. He is going to greatly influence Hitler in terms of his speaking, in terms of his attitudes towards Jews. And again, we're moving more and more on the eve of World War I. Nationalism becomes even more important. It was a cause of World War I. And the problem is the Jews don't have a state. They are excluded and they're not allowed to be a part of a state because, according to some, Hammar, the Jews were not a race, but a religion. He is the one who's given credit with creating the term anti-Semitism. Because of this, they become a target of political parties. And this is during the age of irrationalism, where race theory is prevailing. Darwinism. If you know anything about Darwin and his theory of evolution, it is greatly based in racism. And social Darwinism by Hubert Spencer, the same way. And all of this has to be thrown into consideration that there's this idea that we have to protect our blood. We have to protect our nation. We have to get rid of the inferiors, those that don't contribute to our society in terms of a meaningful way. And if you think about it, that can be dictated or determined by hundreds and hundreds of different ways. You know, approximately 100,000 Jews are going to serve in World War I for Germany. And that will save their lives for some of them when the Holocaust starts, and they'll be spared until the final solution. But we have to remember that the Germans, the Nazis, they didn't think of the Jews as people. They thought of them as a disease. And therefore, even if they had a stellar military record, they were to be eliminated eventually as well. Before we start looking at specific information in terms of the Holocaust, I want to give you all 3 examples of how common, ordinary German citizens stopped the Nazis from carrying out violence against people. The first one is the T4 program, the killing of the elderly and the disabled. This is not about killing Jews. This is about killing anyone, typically Germans, that they viewed were a strain on society, those that maybe had a mental disability, physical disability, etc. When the Catholic Church learned of the T4 program, it was stopped. Hitler had even made a statement to the effect of that there was still too much of a Christian moral influence in Germany at that point in time. So they stop it. Do they intend to bring it back up and intend to do it again? Absolutely. But at this point in time, it stops temporarily. 2, in 1941, they tried to take away all crosses and crucifixes from homes and churches. German women, for the most part, said no. They refused to give them up. And because of this, the Nazis once again said that, the time is not right. Hitler said that they needed more indoctrination in terms of National Socialism. And therefore, he allowed the women to keep their crosses and crucifixes. And then thirdly, in 1943, early 1943, in Berlin and other surrounding cities, the SS tried to round up Jewish men who had married German women before 1935. They were going to round them up and take them to what I'm going to call the city square, because we can all relate to what that is, and they were going to kill them. The problem is, and what the Nazis didn't expect, is their German wives showed up and stood in front of their husbands and pretty well said, if you kill him, you will have to kill me as well. Because of this, the Jewish men were allowed to go back home with their German wives and were not bothered again. I would like to tell you that German men that had married Jewish women stood beside their wives the same way, but for the most part, that's not true. They would sell their wives out for promotions, for better incomes, and just to prove how loyal they were to the state. The World War II gave the Nazis perfect cover. There were 3 phases to the Holocaust. The first phase starts with the boycott of Jewish shops on Saturday, April 1st, 1933, to Crystal Night, November 9th and 10th, 1938. It's important to note that the Nazis operate on a trial and error pattern. They try to do something on a small scale. For example, this boycott. The overwhelming majority of Jewish shops were closed on Saturday because that was their holy day. So you try to see if the Germans will boycott when the shops are mostly closed. You don't try it on a Monday or a Friday or etc. when almost all the shops are open. What they discovered is, for the most part, there was little to no opposition, and the people went right along with it. So from this point on, they start upping their game. Crystal Night, November 9th and 10th, 1938, to the Wannsee Conference in January 1942 is the second phase. Here's where you really start to see violence start to increase. Crystal Night was where they attacked all those Jewish shops, where they attacked and tried to destroy anything and everything that was Jewish, and they started rounding more Jews up, sending them to ghettos and some to concentration camps, etc. The third phase is from the Wannsee Conference to the end of the war. If you remember, in January 1942, Germany is winning World War II. However, at this conference, the SS tries to find ways to pull resources away from the army to where they can kill Jews at a higher rate. This is where the final solution comes in. And this is where the strategy becomes round all the Jews up and kill them as fast as possible. I've already told you all, I don't think it's coincidence that just a few months after the Wannsee Conference and the decision of Hitler to pull resources away from World War II, that Germany starts to lose the war. Another sad fact in all this is that IBM, under Thomas Watson, created the software to conduct the census. And all the territories that Germany occupied to find out where the Jews were, to round them up, and to get rid of them. They kept 6 copies of these records. When you keep 6 copies of something, you want to make sure that you don't have anyone who falls through the cracks. Here are a series of laws that were passed that took the rights away from the Jewish people. For example, you see that these laws are going to take away all the rights away from the Jews until they literally say that the Jews contaminate air, so they take away their right to breathe. And when you take away someone's right to breathe, you take away someone's right to live. 34, all civil servants had to be German. 35, you have the first of the 15, which were in 12 sets of the Nuremberg laws, which were designed to protect blood and property. These are the laws that specifically are going to take everything away from the Jews. It's also in November of 35 that the National Law of Citizenship is passed. It says Jews cannot marry Germans. It reads almost to say that, Germans cannot marry Jews because Jews are not human. It's also in 1935 that Jewish children are banned from playing in all public places. They were banned from playing in parks, playgrounds, the public streets, swimming pools, etc. The only place that Jewish children were allowed to play were in Jewish cemeteries, which is one of the saddest facts that you could ever hear about the Holocaust and about what happened to the Jewish people. In June 1938, you have the Third Reich citizenship law, where they took away the property away from Jews, especially those that were that had some wealth. They couldn't own businesses after 37. It's also in June of 38 where they start burning synagogues. The first in Munich. Nobody says anything, so more will follow in Vienna, Berlin, and Nuremberg. Again, you start small, and they just continue to expand. And there were very few people that had a desire to stand up and try to protect the Jews. Because of this, It became a major is a major detriment to them, and it's what allows the Nazis to wipe out so many via the SS. There are a couple really good movies about the Holocaust. Schindler's List is what I regard as the best. While it's not completely historical accurate, it does give a good presentation in terms of the kinds of things that Jews dealt with. On the video that I'll show in class, you'll see information about Kristallnacht and the ghettos and the Jundesrat and stuff. Adolf Eichmann is the guy who comes up with the idea of the final solution. There was a movie made rather recently about the capture of Eichmann in the early 60s called Operation Finale, where they captured him in Argentina and put him on trial. Eichmann is going to claim that it wasn't illegal to kill Jews in Germany, so he couldn't be punished. In fact, he says that there were no blood on his hands. He never killed anybody. He was only doing his job. Some other really good sources. Raul Hilberg wrote a book called Destruction of the European Jews that is the basis for the majority of the early information I provided to you. There's also Marian Kaplan's book, Between Dignity and Despair, which kind of looks at the Jewish women's perspective of the Holocaust. It's absolutely excellent, won a lot of awards. Hannah Arnett wrote a book called Eichmann in Jerusalem, a report on the banality of evil, which is all about Eichmann's trial. Another really, really good book. And then Daniel Goldhagen wrote a book called Hitler's Willing Executioners, which talks more and more about the very last statement on this slide. You can't kill 6 million Jews, 5 million Russians, thousands and thousands and thousands of other people such as Roma and Slavs and others without the support of the common, ordinary population. The Holocaust was not just a Nazi thing. It was not just a German thing. In many ways, it was a European thing. And when you see these videos in class, they're going to be really brutal. They're going to be really bad at times. But it was the past. It was the fact. And we have to make sure that we remember that. You all have a good day. I'll see you all in class next time.